Welcome to Wildcat Science with Mrs. Haugo. This is Physical Science. We're in Chapter 1, Forces, and we are in Section 1.2, Weight and the Spring Scale, and this is Part 4. Today we will be going over the questions. So please go to Classroom and find your Chapter 1, Forces, and open that up. You can pause the video while you do that. Okay, starting with number 2. The spring that you will use in the next section is different from the one you used in this section. Pull gently on the two springs and describe the difference between the two springs between them. So I will show you. We have a green spring and we have a brown spring scale. And when I pull on the brown spring scale, there's some tension there. And then when I pull on the green spring scale, it pulls more easily. So starting out with a race strategy, the difference between the two spring scales is the brown spring scale has more tension when I pull it, and it's harder to pull. The green spring scale has less tension, and it's easier to pull. So please write that down. And again, remember you can pause the video to do your answers. Okay, B. Suppose you hang identical objects on each spring scale. When the objects are at rest, which spring scale will stretch more? Explain. So we have our object, and when I hang it on the brown spring scale, it moves, the plunger right here moves about 1.5 centimeters. And then when I hang that same object on the green spring scale, it moves about 3 centimeters. So the same object made the green spring scale spring move more than the brown spring scale. So looking at B, suppose you hang identical objects on each spring scale. When the objects are at rest, which spring scale will stretch more? Explain. So remember, when we hung an identical object, the green spring scale stretched more. And a hint is, remember in A when we said the green spring was easier to pull and had less tension? So you'll want to explain in B. And then when you're done with B, moving on to C. Does one spring scale exert a greater force on the object than the other spring? Explain. So we know that B spring moved more for the same weight. So the question is the spring more stretchy, or is it creating more force? So we know that to hold up this weight, we need 3 newtons of force. And so the green spring scale provides 3 newtons of force to hold up this weight. And the brown spring scale also provides 3 newtons of force to hold up this weight. So the question is, does one spring scale exert a greater force on the object than the other spring? So you'd use a race strategy. Yes or no. One spring scale does or does not create a greater force on the object, and then you would explain. Please pause the video until you're done with number 2. So moving on to number 3. Looking on page 5, what amount of force is shown by each spring scale in figure A from left to right? And don't forget your units, which remember will be newtons. So please open up your book to page 5 to follow along. So number 3 says, what amount of force is shown by each spring scale in figure A? And then we're going to do A, B, and C. And in A, you can see the bottom of the force indicator is right there at 0. So we'll do 0 newtons. So we did A together, and then you're going to be doing B and C. And let's just talk through this. So we see that, let's look here on B. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 marks between 2 and 3, so that means each mark is 0.1 newtons. So if we look here, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The bottom of the force indicator is between the 1 and the 2 and 5 little marks between 1 and 2. So what would that represent? And then looking at C over here, we can see that the bottom of the force indicator is between the 3 and the 4, and the bottom of the force indicator is one little line after 3. So the question is, what would that represent? Coming back to our book, so remember A is going to be 0 newtons, and then B and C you'll need to find out and remember to write newtons and your answer to the nearest tenth of a newton. So you can pause the video until you're ready for number 4. Number 4, in the supermarket, weights are given in pounds, abbreviated LB, an Old English unit. 1 pound equals 4.45 newtons. What is the weight of a 5-pound bag of potatoes in newtons? So we've set up a conversion factor here where our original quantity, 5 pounds over 1, times our conversion factor, because we know there are 4.45 newtons in 1 pound. So then we need to just solve it. So we know our units pounds on top and pounds on the bottom will cancel. So we're left with just newtons. So you'll want to put newtons here. And then we times everything on the top. 5 times 4.45 equals, you want to get a calculator and do that, divided by 1 times 1, which is 1, which cancels out. So our answer is going to be 5 times 4.45, and our answer is going to be newtons. And then that is the weight of a 5-pound bag of potatoes. Please put your answer here, and then also use a race answer. Starting out, the weight of a 5-pound bag of potatoes is blank newtons. Great, and then pause the video till you're done and ready for number 5. Number 5, suppose that two objects are individually hung from a spring scale and that each object stretches the spring by the same amount. And the questions are, which of the following properties of the object, size, shape, weight, or color must be the same, and explain? And B, which of the following properties of the objects, size, shape, weight, and color, which could be different, and explain? So we have two objects here that are different, and they all have the weight of 1.5 newtons. So there's object 1, and then here is object 2, which also has a weight of 1.5 newtons. So looking at those two objects, object 1 and object 2, so which of the following properties of the objects, size, must be the same? Must they have the same size when they stretch when they both stretch the spring to the same amount? Do they have to have the same shape? Do they have to have the same weight? Do they both have a weight of 1.5 newtons? And color, do they have to have the same color? So for A, which of the following properties must be the same? So comparing these two objects, we know that they both stretched the spring and had a weight of 1.5 newtons. So which ones must be the same? So the property of the objects that must be the same is, and then explain why they have to have that same property when they stretch a spring scale by the same amount. The spring on the spring scale by the same amount. And then B, which of the following properties of the objects could be different? Could their size be different? Could their shape be different? Could their weight be different? And could their color be different? So given the fact that they stretch the spring on a spring scale the same amount. So starting out with a race answer, the following properties of the objects that could be different are, and then you want to list those for B and explain why they could be different and still stretch the spring scale by the same amount, a 1.5 Newton stretch. Okay, so you want to finish up your questions and good job. All right, thanks. Bye.